Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Today's topic is retraining characters in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And this is my variant rule. I suppose you could call it a house rule. I'm going to call it a variant rule myself. I don't think it really matters whether you call it a house rule or a variant rule. It's something that I use. And it's not something that I just made up myself. It's actually been created by somebody else. So I have actually just appropriated that idea and expanded on it. So the first thing with my variant rule with regard to retraining, and that is I apply this at all levels of play. I don't have any restrictions on what level the character is in terms of them retraining their character class and so forth. One of the aspects to retraining that I have made sure to adopt and make clear to my players, and that is I allow my players to change absolutely everything on their character sheet except their name, their gold, their equipment that they're carrying currently on their character sheet for whatever character they have. This means that we don't wind up with the character being completely remade or with a completely new character, which I find more disruptive sometimes than just having them make slight adjustments to their character or even major adjustments. One of my stipulations when I use retraining is that it can't be done during a game session. If they're going to make any adjustments and changes to their character, they need to let me know, of course, but they need to do it before the game starts, or after the game session, but certainly not during the game. One of the things I have found is a few players will show up for the game session and say, oh, can I just quickly make some adjustments to my character because I know you do retraining, and I will say, well, we're starting in 5 minutes, so no. Do it after the game session. So if you wind up with this happening at your table, if you implement this rule and this variant rule, look, if they show up at the session and they haven't made those changes already, then that's probably not going to happen. If they've made the changes and they didn't inform you, then sometimes I won't allow that, particularly if they have adopted something I did not actually stipulate was part of the game when we had our session 0 and we formally sort of decided we would play together. There are a few things that I don't worry about. I stripped away everything that I thought was just going to create problems for myself, and I just don't worry about these things. It's up to you how you approach things, but I have stripped away everything I thought was honestly just traditional or wasting my time or I didn't really need to hang on to. The first one is I don't worry about them having to take a short or long rest before they make adjustments or retrain their character. So it is not stipulated that at the end of the game session there needs to be a short rest taken or a long rest taken before retraining can occur, obviously outside of gameplay time. So I don't stipulate that. Another thing that I don't worry about, and I know a few people will be upset by, is I don't worry about in-game story logic. Is it logical that they would have changed the nature of their character in terms of their training, their class, even their race? Is it story logic? Is it gone out the window? I don't worry about that sort of thing. All I care is their character has the same name and the same gear, because I don't want them abusing my good nature with regard to how much gold they might have on their character, how much they might have in terms of equipment, whether that be because I've allowed them to have magic items in advance at a certain level or anything like that. So I don't worry about game story logic whatsoever. Another aspect to the game that I don't worry about, and that is the logic of character development. I eliminate that. I know a lot of people find that difficult to swallow, but I just don't see the point because I don't worry about a lot of different things nowadays. I used to in the past because I was told that was the way it was supposed to be done and it had to be done that way, but honestly, bollocks to that. I don't worry about the character having to level up. So if at the beginning of a game session or end of a game session, I don't concern myself with, is the character about to level up? None of that comes into play. I don't worry about that sort of thing either. I don't wait for them to be in a position where they're in downtime, so they're not currently in a dungeon or adventuring or anything like that. So downtime. I don't insist on there having an opportunity for downtime to explain the retraining process. And then lastly, which I know has started to be applied to the Unearthed Arcana, Jeremy Crawford's already talked about it, how they wait until the ability advancement. I don't worry about ability advancement. None of that means anything to me. I can live with it. My Dungeons & Dragons game will not come to a crashing halt. Nothing bad will happen. The earth won't stop rotating or anything like that, so I don't concern myself with that. Now, I want to make this clear. This is my application of retraining. If you want to set limits yourself and for your players, that's up to you. But my way has fewer dungeon master headaches, which is why I'm giving you the heads up about essentially the things I don't worry about, because I know people will ask me questions about it. The other thing I don't do is I don't check the players' character sheets for cheating. I have already explained my view on players cheating at the game. It will always come out in the wash. If somebody is cheating with their character sheet and making adjustments that they shouldn't be doing or put stuff on there, it will come out in the wash. Somebody will find out, whether it's me or another player, and I just don't really allow that sort of thing in my game. Eventually those players just don't wind up at my table, because if I can't trust them to do the right thing with their character sheet, why am I playing with them? Certainly legitimate mistakes I have no issue with, but I don't go checking character sheets. The only time that I feel like it's necessary to check a character sheet with regard to retraining or even creating a completely new character is when it's a new player and they are not aware of all of the ins and outs and the requirements for making a legal character within the group that I'm playing with. Now, as I said, this is not my own personal idea. Wizards of the Coast, their design team, provided this method of retraining for level 1 to 4 through Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League gameplay. Their open public games that they run, those sorts of things. And when I saw this, when I was a Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League local coordinator, when I saw this and they were applying it from level 1 to 4, I thought, well, actually, I could apply that right through all the levels in my own games and it would solve so many problems. So that's exactly what I have done. So if you thought that Fred had suddenly come up with some sort of magic pill or sage advice that nobody else had ever thought of, that's just not the case. Remember, I'm just a normal person. Okay, reasons that players want to change their character, they don't really matter. I know a lot of people get hung up on, but why is the player wanting to change their character? I couldn't give a rat's butt about it. Honestly, I don't care. All I want is to ensure that my players like playing the character they're playing, and I've had many different types of players at my table, and they all have different ways of playing the game and different motivations for the types of characters they play and how they play their character. So to accompany, to make sure I can adjust how I operate, I don't worry about that sort of thing. If you are concerned about that, then I'm going to list a whole bunch of different reasons, because I know you'll want to know what to do with and why a player might want to change their character. I'm going to talk about that, but I want to make it clear I don't care, not at all. Alright, so the first one is often quite common, and that is the players unexpectedly become bored with their character. They thought that the character they made would be something they would be interested in. They've been playing it for a little while, maybe a couple of sessions, and they've suddenly realised that it was a boring character. They should have built something else. They should have created something else. Or they've been playing the same character for like 6 to 12 months. They're like level 12 or 10 or whatever it is, depending on how far they've been fast they've been advancing, and they're starting to get bored with the character and they want to just go and play something else because that character doesn't feel like it's giving them the outlet that they look for. Because let's get real, most people who play Dungeons and Dragons play it to escape reality. And if it's not fun and it's not entertaining and interesting and it's getting boring, then they go and use their time for something else. Number 2 is new toys and options become available, which initially when Dungeons and Dragons 5e came out, there weren't really that many options available. You really just had the player's handbook and that was it. But as time has passed, we now have the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which I think is appalling. We have the Player's Companion. We have a few options in Volo's Guide to Monsters. There's Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And then we've got Mordenkainen, the supplement that came out not so long ago. And there are a few options and accessories, not a lot, in some of the pre-made published adventures that Wizards of the Coast has put out, which you can also delve into. And so sometimes it's just about, okay, there's a new toy, a new option, it's become available, and rather than wait the year or year and a half or whatever it is before I get a chance to play a new character, I'd like to implement it now. So that's sometimes the case. I don't have a problem with that. I understand that. Okay, it is unfortunate, but sometimes a player will make a disastrous mistake in the way that they were applying the roles, their understanding of how they worked together, what they were trying to do, particularly if they have a very mechanical focus. It's not so much an issue if they're more focused on role-playing the social aspect to their character or exploration. Often that's not really affected because, as we know, most characters in Dungeons and Dragons are very much focused on combat. So sometimes they just make appalling mistakes, and there's multiple reasons for why that happened. So I don't worry about those sorts of things either. If you feel that's necessary, then so be it. A player can also realize that the character does not work the way they expected. This is sort of going back to the mistakes. When I say mistakes, sometimes the mistakes we are talking about were, I'm not even going to go into it because they're really, really strange. And when I say multiple reasons, I'm sure a few of you know what I'm talking about. But sometimes players realize that characters just don't work the way they expected. There's a misunderstanding with their intention and the actual implementation of that character, and so they want to make an adjustment. So I don't stop them from making adjustments to their character because of those sorts of reasons. This one is quite amusing, and that is a mismatch between the character and the campaign you're running. The player initially was sort of indicated by the Dungeon Master, the player got the impression they were playing Lord of the Rings style game, but only to find out that the Dungeon Master could only reveal so much or didn't reveal enough information. Sometimes Dungeon Masters can't reveal enough information because it would give too much of the story away and too much of the surprise away. And so they have to hold back a little bit of stuff. So that's not really the fault of the Dungeon Master or the player. It's just a mismatch between the actual character and the group they're playing with and the campaign. Particularly if you think you're playing Lord of the Rings style game and the Dungeon Master is running Winnie the Pooh. So just a mismatch in that way. And then I would say the last one that comes up, which I think probably most people have the strongest reaction to. I don't worry about it nowadays because there are so many people, nerds and geeks will always focus on those sorts of aspects of the game, and if you're going to allow people who like the crunchy bits of the game, the mechanical side of it, then you need to expect that they're going to have this reaction. This is when players want to test all of the options in the game, literally everything. It's not just good enough for them to look at it, read it. They'll often be able to memorize all the rules. They can read it once and now they know how it works and interplays with another rule. And so they want to try it all out and actually test it. It's not good enough for them to just sit there with a spreadsheet and figure out all of the mathematical probabilities behind the game. We're talking about our power gamer. So the power gamers, you'll find, like the concept of retraining because it doesn't affect their ability to try new things. So 6 different reasons, all slightly different. I don't worry about any of them. I honestly don't think that they are good enough reasons to stop people from changing and retraining. Okay, let's have a talk about some of the problems that can occur. Here's the first thing. It's great if players say that they want to play a different character. It's good because if they tell the Dungeon Master, now the Dungeon Master knows that they're not really interested in playing that character, they want a different character. But sometimes the players don't tell the Dungeon Master, and this can cause significant problems. And I will go into some of those problems because they are massive as it happens. When it comes to a player coming to a Dungeon Master and saying, look, I would like to play a different character. Sometimes the Dungeon Master will say, yes, that's fine, make a new character. If that happens enough times from enough players, they start to get a bit weary of allowing people to do that sort of thing, bringing in a completely new character. The fear is of the constant rollover of completely new cast members or characters can be quite frustrating for how you actually implement and run a campaign over a long span. For a Dungeon Master, this tends to mean that the reaction to a player saying, I would like to play a different character, is their reaction is going to tend to be, no, you can't. When your character dies, then you can. Now here's the trap for a Dungeon Master, particularly when they view the application and the use of characters this way, is the players now know exactly what they need to do. Now, if you've ever watched the Game of Thrones, you know that the cast of characters has changed a lot. There's been a lot of character death. I want to explain to you what's going on here, and also a few characters that just sort of weren't interesting enough and they just came out of circulation. Now that the player knows that they can't change their character unless their character dies, you get the new suicidal character who forces the issue for the Dungeon Master and the party, and they can get their character killed for sure because they're trying to make sure it dies so they can play a new character. They can also affect everybody else at the table. That means other characters could also die. You could even wind up with a total party kill or TPK, and this is because unless the other players know that that player is deliberately trying to commit suicide with that character, they might try to save them because that's the thing that makes sense to them in terms of how they would run their character. The other problem is when you lose your character, when you deliberately sabotage the combat by making sure you put yourself in a position where your character is wiped out, that means the party is weaker, making the combat encounter much more difficult to actually be successful with and survive. And therefore, again, we go back to character death and the TPK. So those are the things I try to avoid because I've seen it happen. I've done it myself as a player. I've seen other players do it at the table when the Dungeon Master says, no, you can't make any changes. When your character dies, then maybe you can make a new character and do something like that. So don't fall into that trap and wind up with a whole lot of suicidal characters at your table because you wouldn't let them adjust something. When players run characters they don't like, it causes all sorts of troublesome problems in a wide range of ways, which will completely blow your mind. You'll spend far too much time trying to figure out how to solve these problems or jumping onto the internet and talking to somebody on YouTube or the Facebook or wherever you go, these community forums, Reddit, trying to get advice on how to solve a whole bunch of problems because, one, that player is no longer motivated to play that character. So suddenly they just don't seem to be very interested and they're on their phone more. Or I've talked about the suicidal character, but there are other ways that players can mess things up by sabotaging the game. And that's the sort of behavior that can happen as they get resentful and frustrated with the fact they're stuck with something they don't like. And I want to make it clear, this is why I implemented this rule, because it eliminated so many problems. So when I present you with this variant rule, I'm serious about everything I say. And I'm serious about removing all of those boundaries and restrictions, because I'm all about reducing the Dungeon Master hassle and letting the players have their choice. And ultimately, I want them to have a good time, but I also want my life to be easier. And this makes my life so much easier. So trust me, it's worth giving it a go. Now, if you found this video useful, fantastic. I actually have hundreds of videos for Dungeon Masters and players that provide really useful advice, and you're welcome to go and check out those videos if you like. I have a series called The Lazy Dungeon Master, which you might also find useful. I actually have a series of videos on variant roles that I use in Dungeons and Dragons that I talk about, that you might also want to check out if you're inclined to sort of look at that sort of thing. Now, if you want to support the channel, so I keep doing videos like this, you can do that on Patreon. You can do that by using affiliate links down in the description to the book depository and Amazon. You can also buy merchandise from me, or you can just watch my videos. There's no reason why. You can just watch more of my videos. That always helps me out a lot. Make sure to share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.